Namaste, viewers, and welcome to our new series, The Healing Arts. And our guest today on the auspicious Guru Purnima day is Dr. Ramesh Bijlani. Thank you, Dr. Bijlani ji, for joining us from the SriAurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. Viewers, you might have seen the first of our episodes in this series where Dr. Bijlani told us about his early life, his schooling in Salvan Public School. Then he went to All India Institute. He chose physiology. He was a professor, a teacher and a professor and a researcher for a very long time. He did a course at MIT, a fellowship at MIT in nutrition. And I would say, at least in India, he was one of the pioneers in this lifestyle medicine where you look at, chronic, not acute, but chronic illnesses and change your diet and exercise, sleep, stress, other things to produce remarkable results, much better than lots of medication. But in this episode, which is called The Turning Point, we want to know from you, Dr. Bijlani, what made you, first of all, gravitate towards spirituality? And the most important question, how did you come to SriAurobindo?
Well, on one hand, I was doing this research on nutrition, primarily human research, as I said. That's a decision I had taken quite early in my career. And this research was on nutrition in relation to chronic disease, particularly cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And this field of research was expanding to look at lifestyle as a whole. So that I was aware of. And then what looks like a coincidence, on a Sunday morning, uh, while I was going through a difficult phase in life in 1992, on a Sunday morning, I saw in the Sunday newspaper that in the daily events column, there was a Sunday satsang at 10 o'clock in the morning in SriAurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. So I thought, let me go there, at least I'll get some peace of mind. Uh, Although I was not blind to matters religious and spiritual, even earlier, as I said, but I had an aversion to going to such places. I didn't go to places of worship or ashrams, etc. Even if I went to temples and churches, it was more to admire the architecture and the beauty rather than out of a sense of devotion. I did go, but then it was like a visitor, just trying to admire the architecture and the beauty of the place. But when you are going through a difficult phase, your resistance weakens, and so that's how I decided to go to this place. Why I didn't go is because I thought that what I was reading uh, was enough to help me lead an ethically sound life. And there was no need to go to such places because these places will be having big crowds, they may be unclean, and there'll be a lot of hypocrisy there, rituals and ceremonies which I will not like. And so all these prejudices were there. But then the resistance weakened because of this difficult phase in life, and I came here, and I was in for a surprise. There were no big crowds, and the place was clean. The there were no rituals and ceremonies going on, and what was being talked about was not religion but spirituality, and it was very punctual. It said 10 o'clock. It started exactly at 10. Now, and I learned that the satsang was not only that Sunday; it was almost every Sunday. So I started going almost every Sunday, and then I started reading. And it was after reading SriAurobindo, particularly the synthesis of yoga, that I realized what yoga really was, and then how it could be a lifestyle and a stress buster, and how, in fact, it was also a spiritual discipline. So, all these things, which are hackneyed expressions, but I didn't understand earlier, they came to life. And that led to a convergence of my personal life and professional life. Because now I could see how yoga could be brought in the prevention and treatment of chronic disease. So that made me instrumental in establishing at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences in the year 2000 a patient care facility called the Integral Health Clinic, which started providing lifestyle modification courses based on yoga for prevention and management of chronic disease in tune with the advances in mind body medicine. Because the pioneers in this field, like Deepak Chopra, Dean Ornish, Bernie Siegel, Larry Dossey, they were all looking at yoga not as a set of physical practices. They were looking at it as a holistic discipline, uh, from a very broad point of view, and therefore it was sort of quite closely aligned to what my understanding of yoga now was after reading SriAurobindo. So, and this had got closely linked to mind-body medicine, because uh, mind-body medicine is basically, using the powers of the patient's mind to prevent and manage disease, which means that if the patient has faith in the doctor, has faith in the system of medicine that he has chosen, has faith in the treatment that the doctor is giving, and above all, if he has faith in the self-healing capacity of the body, he is more likely to improve. That is one aspect of mind-body medicine. The other aspect, which had become very which had been put on a very strong scientific footing, was psychoneuroimmunology. That is, the immune system is closely linked to the psychological state. So now yoga was being looked at, when it was looked at in a very comprehensive manner, as a mind-body tool, and that is how I brought it in this clinic. So it was a mind-body tool. Now, one thing which is unique about yoga is that, what we understand is that if we don't look at it from the spiritual angle, then one would say, well, I've understood that the mind and the body are closely related. So suppose we tell the patient, don't worry about anything, and the patient says, okay, I'll not worry about anything from tomorrow. Will it work? It won't really work, because the mind has two aspects, feeling and thinking. And feelings are, by their very nature, very volatile. And the intellect, the thinking part, is always vacillating. So how can an entity which is always volatile and vacillating uh, really be at peace? And unless the mind is at peace, this mind-body relationship doesn't work. So this mind therefore needs an anchor, and the anchor is the soul. And that is where the spiritual element of yoga comes in. So this mind has to be anchored. And what does this anchoring mean? After a lot of reflection and all this over years, what I've come to, essentially what it means is bring more love in your life. Forget what you want. Because if you start with the fact that I want to be happy or I want to be healthy, then it is wanting something. And because I want to be happy and healthy, therefore I will eat this, I will not eat this, I'll do this much of physical activity, I'll stop smoking. And because I have been told don't worry about anything, I will not worry about anything. All this does not work. On the other hand, if you say that I forget about all that, the purpose of my life will be fulfilled if I bring more love in my life. And I express this love by giving what I can to those who need it. Then the spiritual growth becomes a byproduct. Fulfillment of the purpose of life becomes a byproduct. Happiness and peace of mind becomes a byproduct. And health and wellness also becomes a byproduct. Everything else follows. So instead of pursuing these things, just do what you're supposed to do. That is, bring more love in your life and express it by actually giving. And the rest will just follow. So instead of your pursuing health and well-being will pursue you.
That's very beautifully put, because
So
you
that is how
usually,
sort of we
most
looked at
people look at
yoga.
life in terms of acquisition and gaining and getting, and then that puts you into a terrible spiral, I would say, a kind of trap. You're always on this treadmill. Anyhow, but we've talked about this, Rameshji, many times. We've even done this book on biomedicine and alternative therapeutics, healing across boundaries, if you remember. And the perennial question comes up that modern biomedicine, which is evidence-based, triple trials, blind trials, etc., they don't accept an entity called the soul at all. Whereas in Ayurveda, we accept that, illness has many causes, adhibhautik, adhidaivik, adhyatmik. So, the trans-physical part of ourself, if it's not even accepted, how can it be brought into focus? But without getting into an argument with these, so to speak, the dominant school, the moment you say love, everybody understands. That's why I liked your approach, because, no matter how hardened we are, we all respond to love. And if you told people bring more love and joy and happiness in your life, it immediately strikes a chord, and it takes us from that attitude of resistance into an attitude of openness and wellness. But let me come back to your own journey. So you started coming to the SriAurobindo Ashram for the Sunday Satsang. I remember those days in the 1990s where we met each other right there. And this is how, as Aurobindonians, so to speak, we always say the mother arranges it. You were at All India Institute, not very far from the ashram, and I was at IIT, and my daughter was studying in Mirambika. So every day I had this sense of gratitude that, I mean, how much more convenient can it be when the divine is coming to your doorstep, as it were, just to make your life beautiful. So when we started doing the satsang, I started speaking there in the early 90s. I remember every Sunday I would come there and I had this overwhelming sense of, so much emotion in my heart that I was being given this opportunity to read Sri Aurobindo, to talk about Savitri. You're going to tell us a little more about that epilogue in the last episode. But it's such a sense of the divine itself leaning towards you, even as you're aspiring. So, can you tell us what made you, actually decide to move to the ashram, even when you were a full professor? You had a wonderful home, which I visited in All India Institute. Your wife was also a professor. So, what made you take that big step to move to the ashram?
Again, I mean, when the Guru picks you up, he guides you. And for coming to the ashram, the Gurus waited till the preparation was complete. And in the same way, they also made it easy for me to take that decision by helping me get some quick promotions, so that the usual sort of
Rat race,
that
the rat
everyone in
race.
academics has, that if not the director of the institute, at least I should retire as professor and head of the department. So that was also fulfilled at a very early age. I became a professor before I was 40-year-old, before 40, which was very unusual in AIIMS those days. So that happened, and therefore I was saturated with that type of achievements. On the other hand, I found that in a senior position, a lot of time was being spent on administration and committee meetings, which was not very productive. I was hardly teaching 10 classes a year to undergraduate students, whereas by then I also had a textbook of physiology, which could teach the whole range of physiology to students through my books, because the book was essentially based on the way I was teaching. And that book is remembered for that, for all the, things which it boxed material and jokes and historical snippets. So all those things it's full of, and the book is remembered for that even now, and the book continues to be there. The book is still thriving. So I had written that textbook, which probably was one of the main things that the Gurus expected of me. The clinic had been established, and I could see that there's nothing more of lasting value that probably I could do for that institute now, in the few years that I still had left. So instead of going on spending time on committee meetings and administration, why not quit? And this came as an impulse in actually 2001. I had established this integral health clinic in the year 2000. About a year after that, in 2001, I went to the Nainital Center of the Delhi Ashram. And that was the year of which was the 100th anniversary of Sri Aurobindo's visit to Nainital. So I spent about 2 or 3 weeks there. It was a long stay and was doing all those preparations. It was there that one morning it came in a flash that why do I have to wait till retirement? I can quit. And so when I came back in 2001 itself, the choice was made. And I started telling my students that now I didn't tell them that I leave, but what I told them was that now you students and younger colleagues who were with me, that now you be on your own. I will not write any more research projects. I'll not take any more students as a guide, and you should start taking over. So I told them that, and so it took a few years to wind up. So by 2005, I actually left the institute, which was not too early. In 1958, 2005, I was 58. I could have gone on till 65. So I could have gone on for 7 years.
7 years left, and you know how people hang on till the very last breath. I also took premature retirement from JNU, and that was unusual. But I think Dr. Lavinia was also there, right? She continued to work at All India Institute for a little bit.
Yes, a little longer. That's how we continued to stay in the AIIMS campus till 2007.
Right. And when you moved, what was your feeling? Were you happy, or did you think, "Oh, I lost my freedom. I regret moving"?
No, I thought I had much more freedom now. Of course, I never felt lack of freedom even in AIIMS. Uh, and sort of that freedom I've always had. Uh, I really never felt that I was in a job. I was
Correct.
not doing it as a job. I was doing it as if I'm doing my own work. I'm doing working it's my own work that I'm doing,
Correct.
not trying
Correct.
to do
But
it for
so
others.
so let me flip the question. Do you think that if you did not either lose your freedom, let's say moving to the ashram, you were free earlier and you were still free here. Did you feel that your sadhana got a bit of a fillip or a boost by moving to the ashram, or you think that also doesn't really make a big difference?
That doesn't really make much of a difference. It's just that the nature of the work changed. In integral yoga, the sadhana is primarily through work. So the teaching and research which I was doing at AIIMS, the textbook of physiology that I wrote, that was also sadhana. And after coming here, the yoga courses that started and the doing more of spiritual retreats, etc., and so on, that was also sadhana.
That's
And
that's
of course,
wonderful.
writing picked up. I got
That's
much more
so
time
we're
to
going
write
to
up
talk
these
about your
videos.
books and your writing in the third episode, but I just wanted to conclude our second episode, the turning point, with that great Mahavakya from the synthesis of yoga, that book which in a way drew you to SriAurobindo, which is of course that all life is yoga. And in fact, this statement has so many layers and ramifications that even our false steps, even our pitfalls are also a part of our growing process. And in fact, in integral yoga, every breath of ours actually is a way to connect us with the divine. So with those words, on this auspicious Guru Purnima, thank you, Dr. Bijlani, for joining us and for giving us your wonderful thoughts. And do stick with us, viewers, because in the next episode, it's going to be a very exciting episode. We're going to introduce you to some of the wonderful books that Dr. Bijlani has written, and also his platform called Yes, and his other activities, his retreats, his lectures, and his main work at the SriAurobindo Ashram, Delhi branch. Thank you, and join us soon. Namaste.